Hi, Sam. It's Vicki Sanderson here, and I wanted to share with you one of my favorite childhood memories, and it's this. When I was very young, 5 or 6, I would often walk to the grocery store with my mom. We lived in the country, so we did pass several older buildings, wooden buildings on the way. And along the back of one of them were several pussy willow bushes. And in the very early spring, of course, the pussy willows would start to come out. And around that time, when we went up there, my mother would take a small pair of clippers and she'd let me cut a bunch of the pussy willow branches that I'd then take home and keep in my room. And I thought they were just magical and beautiful. And I loved having them. So I wanted to share that partly because I wanted to share with people that childhood memories don't have to be elaborate or involve something expensive or hard to do. It was just a really simple little moment that I shared with my mom that has stayed with me forever and that still brings back a smile to my face. Thanks, Sam.
She was a happy girl, one who never wanted for much. Childhood past, as she was once known, was simple yet fulfilled with the life that she knew. Perhaps by today's standards, her actions would be considered quaint by comparison, but the slower, less frenetic life she lived was fulfilling nonetheless. Her days were filled with simple pursuits. She especially liked the outdoors and spent many hours there exploring the world. Her parents supported her 100% and often told her to go out and play and don't come back until the sun goes down. Childhood past obeyed. Her life included unstructured play, outdoors, unfettered by distractions such as technological devices or the digital games that kids play with today. Childhood past was good for the soul. She knew that the best things in life were indeed free or close to it: play, the great outdoors, simple pleasures. Every so often, she'd get caught up in TV shows, but only if she planned it. After all, her favorite programs only came on once a week, if at all, and if she missed them, oh well, she'd just have to wait and see if maybe they'd be rerun in a few months, if ever. And strangely, perhaps, childhood past was fine with this. It was the anticipation of not knowing when she may be surprised by her favorite show coming on the tube when it was least expected. The thrill of the unexpected still meant something in her lifetime.
My name is Daniel Besada, and one of my favorite childhood memories comes back to just after 1985. I was 14 years old, and we did a video. One of my friends had a video camera, and we did a video, Mad Max Beyond Reality. So instead of cars, we had bikes, and I would polish up my sunglasses and frame to the bad guys. I'd polish up my bike with a nice rag. Anyway, there was a chase scene, a fight scene, and the climax of the end of the video, we found a bike that we could destroy, and so I pretended that I killed the bad guys. I picked up this bike. We were in a park, and I threw it against the fence to end the scene. And just over the fence was a lady wearing a robe and curlers. And so the videographer had turned to her, and the last scene you actually see her say, "I'm calling the cops." And that was how Mad Max Beyond Reality finished. I always love remembering that. It always puts a smile on my face.
Childhood past was reliable. You always knew where to find her. She knew what was important and what wasn't, and surprisingly was able to balance both. Maybe it's because her world wasn't as busy and complex as today's world. Maybe it's because childhood past focused on what really mattered: some good, old-fashioned, unstructured play, the great outdoors, and, of course, family. And family was so important to childhood past. Family was the foundation of everything in her world. Her parents were the center of her universe and played a key role in her rearing and development. They felt that it was their role to teach her right from wrong, and they wouldn't relinquish this important job to a friend, neighbor, or, unlike today, to the internet. And yes, sometimes there were problems. Who doesn't have them? Like many children, she suffered through some unpleasant times that included bullying. This happened on the playground or at the park. Childhood Past dealt with it the same way every time, by running away or going inside to her room, both ways of avoiding her bullies. She wouldn't understand how bullies are dealt with today, as the real protagonists are often invisible and the messages of hate are immortal. You see, bullying takes on such a different form today. It's all digital, cyberbullying they call it, and the scary part is that the words, actions, and images circulated to bully a child proliferate at inconceivable speeds. And yes, the painful conversations by bullies live forever online. It's probably a small blessing that Childhood Past didn't live to experience this in her lifetime. Childhood Past was a good student and a lover of learning. She particularly enjoyed going to the library and taking out books that she found after perusing the shelves. It took some work finding books that she liked, but she knew that anything worth having was worth working for. For example, her homework from school often required that she walk to said library, often, and take down the encyclopedia tomes to search for that one little fact or statistic. It took quite some time to do this. Information was harder to find during her lifetime, but she enjoyed the thrill of the chase. What's that expression? It's not all about the destination. After all, it's the journey that opens our minds. And here we sit today in a world so different that Childhood Past might not even recognize it. Things are faster, life is busier, and even kids today are feeling the stresses of a world that in many ways is unrecognizable from the world that existed not that long ago. Childhood Past's world was very different, and her experience of being a kid is one that she cherished and enjoyed. Here lies Childhood Past, whose experience of life was uncomplicated, unfettered, and unforgettable. May she rest in peace.
Hi, Sam. It's Tracy. One of my favorite childhood memories was going to the drive-in as a family when we were kids. My dad concocted this almost like a platform so that it turned our back seat into like a big bed. And we would get in our pajamas and go off to the movies. And the local drive-ins always had a playground for kids. So you would just go and play with random kids that you'd never ever met before, waiting in anticipation for the movie to start. And, you know, my parents would always bring food, but we would always buy popcorn from the concession stand. And then we would sit in the back seat with our pillows and blankets in our pajamas, watching the movies until we fell asleep. And then when we got home, our parents would carry us to bed because we were all ready. Those were great times, and I tried to recreate those with our kids at some of the drive-ins up north. And it's so sad that there are so few of them left around. But that's one of my favorite childhood memories.
Being a kid in the 1970s meant many things to me. It meant having a childhood that was marked by a freedom to roam, a freedom to learn, and a freedom to be, just be. Unfettered and undistracted by the technology that would become staples in my kids' lives, I had no idea about the advances that would come just a few decades later, changing childhood forever for those who, through fate, were born in these later years. Google wasn't a thing. We had libraries and encyclopedias. Texting wasn't a thing either. We had rotary phones and, later on, touch-tone dials, which we thought were oh so modern. And in many instances, we didn't rely on our phones or the library. No, we did this thing that we don't see much of anymore. We talked to each other face to face via in-person conversation. Sounds strange now, doesn't it? My childhood and the childhoods of so many others who grew up before or during the 1970s, 1980s, or even 1990s was one in which their dreams and imaginations were supported by their abilities to explore. We were undistracted by the constant notifications of our phones, the lure of the latest video game or text message from our friends, or the alluring Snapchat filter that just dropped. Immediate gratification wasn't a thing back then, as video on demand, Netflix, digital downloads, and more were non-existent. We didn't have a lot to distract us, so we made up our own distractions, and it was fun. We could go outside, go to the park, or ride our bikes to new and unknown locations alone. Without our parents, believe it or not, we went. And yes, it was fine and nobody called the police. We lived. We thrived. We survived.
We would play a lot of games, a lot of like dress-up games and imagination games, and one day we decided that we were going to be adventurers and we were going to be climbing a mountain. So we dressed up in all of our gear to be climbing this mountain, and then I decided that there was going to be an avalanche. So we had to save all of our friends and all the people who were stuck in this avalanche. So I tied all these skipping ropes together and I threw it over the side of the banister of our stairs, and I got my sisters to help me by tying the skipping ropes around our stuffed animals, and I would pull them up to the top floor as if I was saving them from an avalanche. But then I got kind of bored with that and decided that I was going to have to save my sisters from this avalanche because that'd be more interesting and more fun. So I got them to tie the skipping ropes around their waists, and I would pull them up as if I was saving them. But they didn't make it all the way up to the top floor, thankfully. They would only make it a few feet off the ground before they started complaining that the skipping rope was cutting into them and it was hurting them, and I would get upset and say, oh, come on, like, you're ruining the game. But of course, this is completely unsafe, and those skipping ropes could have broken or like come apart at any time. And I told my mom this story like 8 or maybe 10 years later, and of course she was horrified.
When I think back on my childhood, it seems so very innocent now compared to how I know that kids of the same age today are growing up. Children and young adults in today's world are seeing and learning things that I would never have dreamed of seeing and knowing at the same age, and in many cases, these things are not particularly positive. I think you know what I mean. A simple internet search can turn up images and video that would make even the most laid-back parent blush. And let's face it, it doesn't even have to be a search. Sometimes things just pop up on the screen, whether your child looked for it or not. Parental controls can only do so much, and when young children become tweens and teens, their viewing and listening choices are truly beyond your control. After all, you can't watch them 24/7. They have cell phones, and if they don't, their friends do. But don't get me wrong, I'm not slagging technology. Technology is a good thing. It is the reason why we're able to do many of the things that we do on a daily basis. The fact that we can talk into what seems to be an empty room and get a response from a kindly voice by the name of Siri or Alexa is an amazing thing when you think about it.
Vivid memories of being 3 years old and driving through to London, Ontario, which is about a 45-minute drive from Stratford, to pick up our new pet, a mixed breed dog. And almost like out-of-body memory where I sort of have, there must be a picture or something of me somewhere, where I remember riding back in our station wagon, and I was 3, and our new puppy was sitting on my lap the whole way back. And I remember that time just sort of thinking, this is great. This is awesome. This is what every day should feel like. Everyone should have a puppy on their lap. And that's one of my warmest, fuzziest memories, probably because the dog was warm and fuzzy. This is Stuart Reynolds, or Brittlestar, as you know.
What I'm whimsically recalling is a time when things seemed so much more simple and when life for a child wasn't as fraught as it is today. Indeed, childhood's end, as we know it, may have come at the dawn of a time when technology and its ability to change our lives forever was just beginning. Hey, PTANers! If you like the show, please join the PTAN podcast on Patreon. There you'll find extra content, behind-the-scenes info, and video, and much more. As well, you'll have the opportunity to find out about upcoming PTAN podcast activities and shows. Go to patreon.com/PTAN podcast to join. Thanks for your support and stay groovy.